Okay, great. Okay, welcome back to another special edition of the Procurement and Finance Coffee Break. I'm Claire, your finance transformation expert, and as always, I'm joined by Richard Beaumont, procurement guru, procurement extraordinaire.
Yeah, it's not hard to spot the odd one out, really, is it? But that's fine. Do you know what? Why am I here? Well, actually, I'm actually here to help celebrate. And what we're celebrating is International Women's Day, and it's going to come up a day or two probably after this goes live. But having had lots of conversations, we thought it was a really important thing to change the topic completely and really focus on women in leadership, and not just the challenges, but also the breakthroughs and the things that our guests today have seen can help women succeed in leadership roles. And if there was, I can't think of a better theme. So Claire, you're going to introduce everything.
So today we're drawing inspiration from 3 powerful books that I know some of our guests have read. The first one is The Authority Gap by Mary Ann Sieghart. That explores why women are taken less seriously than men, even if they're equally qualified. The second one is How Women Rise by Sally Helgesen and Marshall Goldsmith. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
We did prepare, honest.
Yeah. This is about self-sabotaging behaviours, but actually, if you look at what they are, they're not obvious self-sabotaging behaviours. They're things like reluctance to claim your achievements, or expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your contributions. So there's some really good lessons in this book. And then the third book, by a fellow City Women Network member, No More Menemies by Laurie Meakin. And this is all about shifting the narrative from competitive behaviour to collaboration between men and women. And to explore these themes, we're joined by an outstanding panel today. Ashley, say hello. Ashley is an expert in the education sector, a headhunter and recruitment specialist. Jess, say hello, Jess. We have a business coach. Jess helps women mainly turn their big ideas into business plans and execution. Suzanne, say hello. Hello. Suzanne's a lawyer specialising in employment law and advising on workplace rights and policies. Yvette is president of City Women Network and a D&I specialist, leading efforts on gender equality in business. Kirstine, say hello, Kirstine. Hello. So Kirstine, a fellow City Women Network member and leadership coach with expertise in the financial services sector. So welcome, everyone. So got a packed agenda of questions today, and the first section questions around the authority gap, so visibility and recognition. So my first question's to Kirstine. So in her book, The Authority Gap, Mary Ann Sieghart states that even women ourselves, sometimes unconsciously take other women less seriously than men. Have you ever seen that play out in your coaching sessions with female leaders? And if so, how did you approach it?
Well, first of all, that is a great book. And if anyone hasn't read it, I would highly recommend it, because what it did for me was highlight the fact that in my career, I am guilty, or I was guilty of underestimating women. And that was quite a harsh reality for me, because I never saw myself that way until I read the book. I always knew that I underestimated myself, and I experienced being underestimated by men in certain contexts, but I hadn't seen it from the other side. As in me and my bias. And I think some of that is because we associate authority with masculine traits, more masculine traits. And that can lead us to overlook or dismiss maybe people that don't have as much of the masculine qualities. And I'm not saying male purposely, because we all have masculine and feminine qualities. So sometimes we look for that masculine quality when we're looking for people for roles or opportunities. And if we don't see some of those, it can lead us to overlook. So I do see this play. I see it having played out in my career, and I do see it in my work with clients. The way that I always approach this is with the necessity for us to position ourselves strongly first, because sometimes we wait to be positioned, and sometimes we position ourselves at the back or behind people or things. And my view is we need to position ourselves up front, and that includes where we sit, how we speak about ourselves, how we position our expertise, our experience, our opinions. All of these things are really important. And when you read The Authority Gap, you become very much more aware of some of these issues. And when you're aware of anything, that's when you can start to change it.
Great answer, Kirsty. Richard.
Well, I was going to, delighted to ask Ashley, actually. Authority gap, there's a lot of research that says women will often hesitate to apply for jobs unless they feel they meet 100% of the criteria, whereas men 60%. So we are happier to blag our way into things on a wing and a prayer. And look, live example. I mean, my partner Juliet, she's finished a contract. She's looking to go into something. She's at the point of even being worried about putting she's available for work on LinkedIn because she feels it makes her look like she's unemployed, even though her credentials are fantastic. So, have you observed this hesitancy in, in recruitment? And what's your view on what can women do to overcome it and apply on an equal footing, confident that, they've got the credentials they need?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And absolutely, I have been seeing this throughout my role as a headhunter, which means I go out onto LinkedIn often and I look for candidates, men and women, who can, who are capable of doing the role that I'm recruiting for. And, I always approach people who have enough qualifications and who look a good fit for the role. But yeah, I can think of a lot of situations where I've had conversations with women and they refer usually to a job spec or an advert they've seen about the role, and they start to question themselves and say, oh, but I don't have that qualification, or I've not done that before. Do you think that I would be able to apply? Do you think that they would consider me for the role? And, I do a lot of coaching, like Jess does, letting the ladies know, don't worry if you don't tick all the boxes, it's absolutely fine. And I think there is, kind of something where women are, socialized to doubt themselves and to question their abilities in the workforce. Whereas men, as you say, are much more inherently confident in themselves, thinking, oh, I haven't done that before, but it doesn't matter. I can do that. I've done this, that, and the other. It's fine. And I'll just, so they have that innate confidence that women don't always have. Whereas women have always, I think in a lot of things we're talking about in this panel today, is that lack of self-confidence, that fear of failure, that fear of rejection. So, I say to the women, I mean, it just happened recently. I often have to encourage women to just go ahead and apply and just, and I would say to anybody listening to this, discussion that, you don't have anything to lose by applying. You just have to kind of develop a go for it mentality. And, what's the worst that could happen? You're not shortlisted for interview, but by trying things, it's a learning process. By writing a cover letter, filling out an application, reflecting on your skills in the workplace, that reminds you often, oh, yes, I have done this, I have done that. and that helps you to grow in yourself. And so by applying for the jobs, even if you don't get that job, it does help to build your confidence and remind you of what you can offer out there. And then eventually your turn usually will come where you will get that job. So I just think that, I have seen this, and women can overcome it by just developing that kind of go for it attitude. I've got nothing to lose. And then also, I think if self-confidence is something you struggle with, reach out for a workplace coach who can help you to go through your CV and just see what you have to offer, remind you about all the great things you do have to offer. And I think that coaching can help women to just get that little bit of confidence and go for more jobs and rise higher in the workplace by doing so.
Right.
Great answer, Ashley. And you're absolutely right. If you haven't got that innate confidence to know that you may have gaps in your CV, but you'll figure it out, then a coach might be a great answer to give you that confidence.
Absolutely.
So Jess, moving on to you. Many women hesitate to claim the spotlight, as I mentioned in this book here. To claim the spotlight, often deflecting praise and downplaying achievements. Right, it's not seen appropriate to sort of brag, I guess. How do you coach women to confidently step forward and not feel they're bragging, but just claiming a right to their achievements and showcasing those achievements?
That's a really good question. I mean, I see that a lot here with the women I'm working with. And I once heard this phrase, it's not bragging if it's a fact. And I know it's not as simple as that, because as Ashley said, there's a ton of conditioning that contributes to women minimizing their voice, minimizing their physical self, keeping themselves sort of in these tight little buckets. But one of the ways that I've kind of helped my own clients work around this, and I'm working mostly with impact-driven women who are in the social impact space, is to really try to shift or reframe the way they're thinking about the work that they're doing and how they claim credit for it. So, if you're in that space, nonprofit leaders, et cetera, are a great example of this. It's less about them and more about the work. That's why they're doing it. And so the way I try to think about it is more along the lines of helping people understand the impact of the work that you do. And if you never talk about that, then other people can't be a part of that process. So we want to give people that sense of who we are, what we're doing, and how we're actually helping people in order to increase visibility around the issue or the challenge that you're actually trying to address. So, in order to do that, you actually have to claim credit for yourself. And, How Women Rise actually was a book that changed my life, because kind of like Christine, with the authority gap, I was, trucking along and just thinking that all these behaviors that I was doing were the things that actually helped me be successful. But I realized that up to a certain point, they stop and they actually become detractors. And this is one of those where we sort of stop taking credit later in our career because, again, of that conditioning, because of, a whole host of other things that get in the way of that. And when we don't take credit, when we don't, invite people into the work that we're doing, all of a sudden it becomes very challenging for people to help support us, to help move us along, to give us additional opportunities for you to get new clients. I mean, fill in the gap. So I think we really have to reframe what we're doing. And one way that I sort of think about this is going from a bragging mindset to more of like a bridging mindset. And what I mean by that is helping people see what's possible and inviting them into that process. So, really asking yourself some questions like, how does my experience help someone else take action? Or maybe something along the lines of, what difference does my work make in the world? And then again, inviting people into that conversation. So if it helps you think about taking credit by, really thinking about being in service to others, that your work actually helps people, that, bringing them into that process is a way for you to think about that in a way that feels more palatable to you, then I think that you have to do it that way. But to not take credit for the work that you do, for the accomplishments that you are making, for the impact, is a huge mistake, because other people will just get those people, get those opportunities, etc.
Yeah, I really like that, Jess. So it's basically what you're saying is shift the paradigm. Don't think about it as bragging. Think about it as bridging a communication gap to showcase the value you add in the services you provide, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know, it's interesting, and this is a rabbit hole we're not going to go down because we haven't got time. But I mean, there's a whole load of overlays on that as well. I mean, it's not all things are equal. So depending on culture, upbringing, which part of the world you're in, I mean, just from my perspective, I know that if I was trying to pitch myself stood next to an American equivalent, I would come off second, because my English culture doesn't want to show off, actually is culturally averse to bragging about what I've done. So it's such a complex thing, and so many dynamics on top of that gender differential. So look, Suzanne, what having heard everything we sort of talked about so far, and understanding your journey, what have you done or what have you seen work that helps you establish credibility and overcome these kind of biases in leadership that we've heard about?
Interesting. I feel my journey is a bit different. I started life out as a barrister many moons ago, and then sort of moved away from that independent practice to working in-house in various roles and capacities. But I think actually starting out as a barrister was a really good playing field, because it was tough. Looking back on it, at the time, I probably didn't appreciate how tough it really was. I was used to experiencing discrimination on, based on colour and being a woman. Right. But being at the bar, you sort of saw it at every angle at that time. I'm talking many years ago. I know things have moved on and changed a lot. But it was things like even chambers that you applied to, you'd be turned away just because you were black, or you'd be turned away because you weren't whatever they were predominantly in that chambers. And I know things have changed, and there's a lot of strategies in the bar who has done quite massive inroads on diversity, and now have a chair who is black and female. But for me, it was always in the work. So being really competent in your work is really key. I mean, I think you can't, that's just the given. So, and I felt that there was less room to be a slacker as a female. There was, you had to be really on top of it. You had to really know what you were doing. You couldn't have the same, where there was a male majority, where maybe 60% of the males were working really hard and 40 weren't. You couldn't be a 40%er. You would have to be like the 60% who were working really hard. So I felt like there was never that sort of wiggle room.
Right.
So I've always been on top of the work, always worked really hard, but also taken up the space. So if there are things that I can do and do well, I will say I can do them and do them well. I would be the person, I haven't read The Authority Gap, so forgive me, but I would take up the space. Going into a meeting, I would sit probably at the head of the table. I would take up the room. I wouldn't go to the back of an auditorium. I never sit at the back of a lecture. It just wouldn't happen. And I don't see myself in that way. It might be having onto a girls' school, and as I say, it might be the training of being a barrister. But the main thing is sort of navigating bias. I think in the early years, judges have biases, magistrates, and so in my early practice, which was criminal at the time, and then I moved to employment, I did face issues going to court. My client might get a raw deal because of me. They had a particularly bad case, and that was the bias, and it was even pointed out by the prosecutors who would be there, saying, well, that was a bit rough, So again, it's trying not to take all of that personally, which is incredibly hard, and to sort of rise above that and see beyond it. And even for my clients, they'd get a second bite at the cherry at, say, a bill application or something. So it wasn't all doom and gloom. But just the fact that you would have this issue of being treated less than, that you almost had to develop some sort of bulletproof vest where, you know, you don't let it get to you. And then building up strong relations with other women. I think that that can't be underestimated. So building strong relations wherever you're working with other women. And yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of my thing with that, speaking up, speaking out, continuing with your professional development and taking up the space.
Brilliant answer, Suzanne, and really underlines the amount of resilience and self-motivation you've had to procure for yourself to rise, as you say, because otherwise, if you feel like you're not being heard, that can sometimes, you know, demotivate yourself. So certainly need to have a power source for resilience and self-motivation, no matter the circumstance. So this leads me on to my question to Kirstine. In How Women Rise, keep flashing them up.
Are you being paid per flash?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm just showing I have a
it's like watching a Blue Peter demo from the 70s.
They highlight perfectionism and reluctance to self-promote as key barriers.
Right.
I think Suzanne's question there really gave a good example of overcoming that. Although that kind of need to feel like you're giving 100% and your work is immaculate, perfect. You know, if you're not quite there, you still need to be able to, you know, it's not human to give 100% all of the time. So you can't expect to do that, and unless you do that, then hold yourself back from career progression, right? So is there anything you can add from your coaching about how women in leadership can learn to own their expertise and visibility?
Yeah, I think so. We talked about how we're conditioned to maybe underestimate ourselves and not put ourselves forward. That does play a part. There is also another side of this, and Suzanne touched on a bit of it, which is the working really hard and making sure that you don't fall into the 40% bucket of people that aren't working hard enough. What I tend to see is a lot of overworking, a lot of people pleasing and others first, which what that generally leads to is eventually disconnection from who you are, what you bring, and where you want to go, because you're so reactive to everything else that it's really difficult to look up and sometimes you even miss those opportunities because you're so busy juggling lots of other things that you don't have the time to manage your career. So my advice is always to just step back, slow down, and get really clear on what is the brand that you want to create. Does that help you get where you want to go? And what are the activities that you can put yourself forward for that enforce or reinforce that brand? Because often what I see is that we all get labeled, whether we want a label or not. We all get labeled, and often the overworking perfectionist women get labeled as great team players, safe pair of hands, and that keeps them where they are rather than allowing them to be seen in the bigger roles. So what I'm saying is there's a bit of the situation or the environment at play, and there is also how we manage ourselves, our profile, our career, our business, whatever it is we're aiming for, we have to look at ourselves in the way we want to be seen, and put ourselves in those environments and in those situations where we can be seen that way.
Great answer, Kirstine. Jess, going to you. You obviously coach women to realise their big ideas. From that point of view, is there anything you would add from your experience in coaching women in business? Maybe some practical tips that you provide?
Yeah, I really love what Kirstine was talking about here. You have to be intentional about putting yourself where you want to be in the positioning of your own brand, of the business's brand, et cetera. And that means you have to actually toot your own horn. And, we kind of talked about this earlier, but, there is this reluctance, and I get that, right? Almost every person on here has talked about conditioning. There are some systemic barriers, cultural barriers, put them all together. And those are real things. And we also have to be intentional about how we want to be perceived, how we want to show up, and be diligent about putting ourselves in those spaces. The other thing I'll say here is, we talk a lot about, and I know this is Kirstine's area when she's talking about confidence, but confidence isn't just a thing that you have. It's a thing that you work for. It takes action, and it's through that action that we build the confidence that we need, and that takes courage. And courage, let's be honest, rarely feels good in the moment. So we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, I'm thinking about Suzanne. I mean, I'm from the US, so I don't totally get the whole legal system in the UK, but I suspect it's similar to here. And putting yourself in a position where you're the only, or you're bumping up against barriers where you're not like everyone else, for example, is really challenging. It takes a lot of courage. And so I just really encourage people to think about how they want to be perceived. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? So, when we were talking before about going back to the work that you're trying to have an impact on and what that mission really is, when you're grounded in the mission, when you are deeply committed to the work and to the larger impact, now all of a sudden, these other factors, yes, they're a challenge, but there's something that you can overcome because you're focused on the impact that you're trying to make, and you're not distracted as much by all the extraneous things that kind of keep you stuck. And the other thing I'll say, Kirstine mentioned this, I think Suzanne mentioned a little bit, but we have to get to a place where we're comfortable being a little bit imperfect. And I know that's hard because women are held to a completely different standard, right? Our competence is judged by the quality of our work in a way that's quite different than men. But we have to be okay with that, and continue to keep moving the needle forward. Because as Kirstine said, it's impossible to be 100% all the time. And quite frankly, that standard is ridiculous. So to me, some of this is, how do we as women position ourselves? How do we keep moving the needle forward? And as a whole collective, we have to look at what are the systemic issues that are contributing to some of these problems and be proactive about speaking up against them. That's one of the reasons why the work I do is really about helping people think about their unique perspective and how do we shift narratives? How do we change paradigms that are not really serving the larger community? How do we create better conversations where we create a kinder, more just, more equitable world? And that means people have to actually speak up. That means they have to be willing to be uncomfortable and to say the hard things, even when there's a potential for backlash.
So just I just want to dive in here, because if I do the sort of the quick Richard GPT summary in my head, what we've just heard, right? Suzanne, there are higher barriers to entry for women to get into roles, that once they're in those roles, there is a perception that they have to not only perform at a higher level than their male equivalents in order to feel that they're just holding their own, and that there is an element of owning the room, actually having to exhibit qualities so that you portray your right to be there. But then we're stuck with this problem, which is having done all of that. Again, if you read the literature, there's an element of imposter syndrome, that despite having done all of those things, the extra mile than a male counterpart, there's still a feeling that they're somehow lucky and that they didn't earn their right and they didn't have the the skills to do it. So just just very quickly before we move on, what's your advice on how women can overcome that challenge of feeling imposter syndrome, feeling that they're lucky to be there, rather than genuinely the self-assurance that they owned the right to be there by what they achieved and what they've done?
Yeah. Well, Ashley definitely hit it on the head when she was talking about how women do this in the job hunting process, and I see this as well. I was recently listening to an interview that was with Ilona Maher, who is a women's rugby player here in the U.S. And the interviewer was asking her about imposter syndrome, and she said, what is imposter syndrome? It's like she didn't even know what it was. And I thought that was so fascinating. And
Yeah.
so did the interviewer, honestly, because she was like, what do you mean you don't know, basically? And she said, yeah, I don't have that. And I think that's a bit of an anomaly. But one of the things that she said in that interview, and I wrote it down because it was so powerful, she said, it's okay to be proud of what you've done. It's okay to believe that you deserve something because you've put in the work for it. And I think that's really the attitude that we have to embody when it
Right.
comes to dealing with imposter syndrome, is a recognition that we have put forth the experience, we've put forth we've got the expertise, we have the excellence. It's okay to be excellent and to claim our excellence. Like, that didn't happen by accident. And so we have to be intentional about just acknowledging, like, yeah, I did that. And right, that's all kind of linked together to this larger conversation about claiming your accomplishments, being able to take up space,
Right.
owning the
Right.
room. But I do find that, it is really hard because we do tend to minimize our own expertise. We minimize a lot of these accomplishments. And so sometimes it can be helpful. It just sort of depends on your personality. But, one of the things I talk about a lot is creating a brag bank, something that, allows you to visually see all the things that you have accomplished. I have a board over here on my wall that's just full of, like, what I just call love notes from people, clients, testimonials, other things, so that when I'm having a moment where I'm like, oh, I don't know, like, should I be doing this? Fill in the blank. I'll just look over and be like, yes, you should. You're freaking
Right.
amazing. You should totally do that. So I think a lot of it is just us really being willing to, I hate to keep saying that, but like, owning our excellence, because we are
I
excellent.
like that.
And the work that we're doing deeply matters in the world. The ideas that we're bringing to the table literally are changing lives. I mean, I think that's one of the things that, sometimes women forget, is the solutions that we bring to the table, because we're so close to many of the problems. The solutions that we bring are very unique and are done in such a way that are very communal in nature. And that's something that is quite different than men. And I won't get into the data, but there's a ton of data that supports the very unique way women, particularly in developing countries, are addressing community problems. They're very communal in nature. They're less about the self and more about the whole. And that doesn't come by accident. So this
No.
is where we get to really kind of plant our flag in the ground and say, you know what, I have the experience. I have the expertise. I deserve to be in this space. I'm going to take up this space because the work that I do actually matters.
Right.
Great answer. And just keeping an eye on time, I really want to ask Rebecca.
Sorry, do you know this? No, Claire and I have been doing our procurement and finance coffee breaks a long time, and I've just at the interlude, I've got to share something, and Kirsten's laughing because she knows exactly why I'm laughing. In our normal coffee breaks, we struggle to stick to the script for 4 questions in 20 minutes. And Claire, in wonderful style, has said, look, we're going to go big on this one because this is a really important topic. Let's do 16 questions in 40 minutes. It's never going to happen. But you know what? Who cares? The topic's great. So let's just let it roll.
Okay. So Yvette, I want to bring you in here because we've heard a lot about how as Richard summarised, there's a number of barriers, both external and internal, in terms of mental barriers and conditioning that women have to navigate to succeed in positions of leadership. As your role as president of City Women's Network, what do you think professional women's networks play in breaking down those career barriers?
I think it's a great question, because it really reminds me of one thing that I've learned for sure, that careers aren't just built on hard work. And I hear that a lot, that is a natural female trait to work really hard to achieve. But in fairness, I feel it's a lot more built on connections. And the same way that men may use a golf club to do their connections and their networking, it's the same thing that I believe women need when it comes to establishing and being part of professional women's network. It was an unnatural thing for myself. I'm not going to lie. I came to it really quite late. But I realized since joining City Women's Network, initially trying to build a bit of inclusion and diversity into a space as well, I have to raise, being a Black female, didn't necessarily see myself in that space, because it was primarily filled with regards to those that were in the financial sector and in the city. So I've come into it and realizing the beauty is where you can find a space where you're supporting each other, you're sharing opportunities, you're making sure that talented women do not get overlooked, which is the thing which it's such an awful thing to see talent being wasted, when I know for sure it's out there. I know other women know it as well. Sometimes it's believing in that, and therefore the community of having other women in a similar space kind of enhances that, kind of brings that to the forefront. I also can see that mentorship has been a huge part of the whole notion of the opportunities. And it comes to, when you think about it, having someone to help guide you, to advocate for you, to remind you that you can do it is invaluable. And when women help women, doors open, ceilings crack, and everybody wins. So I'm a really massive advocate that we do have these professional networks specifically for women, because even to Jess's point around the way things are done on a communal basis, we do typically help each other. We've run a mentoring program right now going into our second year at City Women's Network, and have seen actually how it's created this almost sort of mushroom in terms of not only having a linkage with our corporates, where they're putting women forward for the mentorship program, but also the wealth of information and experience and expertise within the network, which is quite happy to offer some of their guidance. And so this kind of constant cycle of helping one another, you can see the fruitfulness that comes from it. So I'm all about the networks.
Thanks, Yvette. Really good response there. And in your other role as a head of diversity and inclusion, I'm interested in what I see, which is often that diversity initiatives often focus on talent acquisition and recruitment, also Ashley's line of work, but retention and promotion are just as critical. What do you think's missing from corporate D&I strategies that could make a real impact into the areas of retention and promotion?
Yeah, no, it's a big interesting point, which I saw a lot, I think, post-pandemic, post-George Floyd, where so many companies had this hell rush to get diverse candidates into their spaces. And when you see that companies were really just focusing on hiring diverse talent, I don't think they really anticipated what it means to keep them and also promote them. It was almost like, if companies just focus on hiring diverse talent, then basically it's like filling a leaky bucket.
Mm.
After a while, you will lose the talent if people didn't feel like it was done on an intentional basis. If it feels like it has been done on a performative basis, then people get wise to that, and then they say, "Do I see a place for myself, a future in the company?" It's not just about having that seat at the table in terms of accessing it when you first get in. There are also what I would call inclusive policies that you need that remove certain barriers, whether it's pay transparency, whether it's flexible work, whether there are strong sponsorships within there. I also think that we have to think about what certain people are looking at now, which I'd heard once from a young man who was really making a headway within the last bank that I used to work. I used to work in financial services for a long time. And he made reference to the Robin Hood effect, where basically he understood with himself, in particular as a Black male, that he would enter the corporate space to gain experience for a couple of years and then seek to start his entrepreneurial career after he'd gained some experience. Right. And that showed you that retention conundrum was still very much there, because he probably did not see a future for himself at the company, knowing that if there's a time split in terms of what he could actually achieve. So I think there has to be great efforts with regards to companies really not only thinking about getting people in, but how do you retain them and also promote them, whether or not redressing your HR policies, whether or not removing those barriers, whether or not making sure that this is communicated throughout a company on a regular basis to ensure that there is clear pathways the minute that you're looking to include relatively what you might think are a new diverse cohort.
I'm going to cause chaos now, because I'm going to ignore. I know it's terrible. I'm going to ignore the script. I'm even going to ignore who I'm supposed to be speaking. I'm going to go in the wrong order. But actually, I really want to pick up on this issue, and just bear with me for a second. I chair a lot of conferences, and in marketing conferences, one of the big things is about how do you make, not D&I, but how do you make your products and your workplace accessible? Asking the question, is there anything in the way of anybody being able to access the product or service or the workplace that I provide? Really simple example, how do you provide descriptive audio on adverts, because adverts are meaningless to a person who has limited or no sight. And it's exactly the same with, as you say, any policy that tries to rebalance or encourage or address historical issues of lack of accessibility are only worth it if they are sustainable, and they are not just a shop front for continuing business as normal behind the scenes. And I'm going to put myself open. The issue is, I am a white male, and therefore, I am therefore part of the issue as to why there are those historical issues in this country, and I can only take responsibility for where I've worked. So, as ever, in the spirit of being entirely practical, how does someone like me, a 50-something-year-old white male who has my life experience, and I'm an ex-army officer, and I've done lots of different industries, and I've worked globally, but what practically can you collectively, all of you, advise someone like me as a stereotype to actually make this real and to create accessibility without doing it in a way that's either not sustainable or actually comes across wrong, and you could use words like patronizing or whatever else, that how do you do this right? Because that to me is the biggest thing that I would love to see out of International Women's Day, is if we're going to make it accessible and equal, then there's got to be change on both parties. And Laurie Meakin talked about it in No More Menemies. It's about reaching a mutually acceptable and beneficial solution to a problem. So what could we do? And I literally, Claire's going to tell me off, but I'm going to just throw it open, because I just think I would love to know. And
I love that question, and I love your openness as well with that, Richard, because part of it is actually being vulnerable and open to hearing what can I do. It's around role modeling and inclusion. How do you, Richard, take it upon yourself to be what I consider to an ally for women? How do you, as an individual male, see that actually it's not what can I gain for it, but what can I give back to women? Right. What is it about, not being a charitable thing, but actually widening your awareness to say, I'm not sure we're hearing all the voices. I need to encourage that. How do I stem the tide of having just maybe a homogenized group, maybe, providing their views? How do I include others? How do I chair a meeting for that matter? How do I ask those pesky, uncomfortable questions as well? And that takes a lot, but it's only through practice that you're able to do so. I do a lot of training with inclusive leadership, and it's one of the things that most people are scared, right? This is an environment where it becomes much more difficult to actually bring forth any of the issues for fear of being shut down, for fear of being ostracized. But this is the space that people do need to step into. And so every time when I have the opportunity to speak to people, it is around like finding that brave point within you to say, actually, you know what, when my mate's saying something wrong about or something offensive to women, for me to call it out. Simple and small act, but it's saying a zero tolerance with regards to that. When it comes to, coming out with a product that probably, is there a blind spot? It's putting that question out there. Is there somebody else that needs to be in this room to opine upon it? So I'll call it little and often in terms of what you can do to change the situation.
Has anyone want to weigh in on that? Because I think it's a really fundamental question, right?
Yeah.
I think, Yvette, you've summed up everything I was thinking perfectly, and that's probably why you're in D&I. You are the expert on this. I do agree, though. I think, Richard, the fact that you're asking the question, the fact that you're in a room with 6 of us, that in itself is something, and then being open enough to say, this is my deal.
I'm going to make a confession now. All right, a confession. This morning I spoke to Juliet, my partner, and I said, look, I've got this, Procurement Finance Coffee Break. And, as Claire knows, I'm right up there with that 100% of men who will blag it by reading the script and then just going into it and getting on with it. That's me. But, there are certain events where you stop and you think, and, this was one of them where you think, actually, this is, and I sort of, actually bothered to read the script again, another first. And then I was about to come in. Now, we've got a load of very famous brand, coffee cups, and they're all like Cool Cat, Mama Bear, all that kind of stuff, right, going on. I was walking in here, and I drink a tea and coffee. And do you know what it said on my mug?
Mama Bear.
Top dog.
Oh, God.
And as I walked in, I literally went, you idiot. What is that? And I went and swapped it for my Be Happy mug. Do it's like you say, little and often. So it's just the small things.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'll be open about it because I literally kicked myself and just gave myself a talking to over by the kettle. But it is the sort. It's language. It's seating round a table. It is, stupid things. Colour of passes. I've worked in companies where men and women had different colour passes. I mean, what's that about? And it's those tiny things which you can deal with. So thank you.
I remember when I started working. Actually, the first company I worked at, they'd only just allowed women to wear trousers.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness! Right.
Yeah. So anyway. We're coming on the end of today's session, but to wrap up the session, I thought it'd be really nice to just go around the panel and just give like maybe 2 or 3 top tips you have for perhaps women in their early career that you have learnt throughout your career, and just it could be around self-advocacy, just 2 or 3 top tips, sort of bullet points of things to think about how women at the start of their career, or perhaps just looking to advance into leadership positions, can reflect on and perhaps take some action on? Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I'll build on what Yvette was saying about networking. Having great people around you, whatever it is that you're looking to do, is so important. Different perspectives, different experiences, different backgrounds. Absolutely, one of the most valuable things that you can build is your network. And the second thing I would say is become more aware of yourself and your thought processes, your limiting beliefs that you may have about you and your capability, and start to disrupt them. Because once you know these things are going on, you can change them.
Great answer. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. So I think, we're talking about women in leadership and how do you get there? And I think, looking back at my career, I've done lots of different jobs. Started out in journalism, then I worked in corporate communications, then I ran a fitness and weight loss center, and now I'm a headhunter in education recruitment. So I've reinvented my career quite a few times. I followed, relatively straightforward path in terms of my education. I had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And I got out in the workforce, and I was one of those women who would sit back and see that there was a leadership position going in a company, and I would sit back and wait for somebody to ask me. And I'd think, why didn't they ask me for that job? I could have done that. And it did take me a while, and I think I am a perfect example of someone who has grown in confidence by doing, and slowly believing a little bit more in my own capabilities. And I think that if I could give advice to somebody else now, just starting out, is what kind of made the difference for me is just I started taking risks. I started with that self-belief, became the risks and belief that I could do that as well as a man, or whatever I wanted to do, I was going to be able to do that. And what we've been talking about here about advocating for yourself, just going for it, and I do advise men and women all the time in interview scenarios, just fake it till you make it. If they ask you and you say, have you done this? Can you do that? You just say, yeah, of course I can do that. And, it's that kind of a can do, go for it attitude, and taking those risk taking, one of the things Claire was going to ask, we ran out of time, but she was talking to me about, negotiating a salary. And the funny thing is that, most people don't ask. They go through this long interview process, they get offered a job, and then, especially for women, they're like, oh, wow, they wanted me. Yes, I'll take it. And they don't think to say, well, hang on a minute. Actually, I think I was really hoping for this figure. I was really wanting this. And, most people in the salary negotiation don't take the risk and ask, for more money. And, you've got nothing to lose in negotiating for yourself in a salary, advocating for a job that you think that you're the most capable person to do that job. And so, yeah, I think self-advocacy, risk-taking, and that builds confidence with women in the workplace, and that's certainly helped me a lot.
Susan, what would your reflections be? What would you tell your younger self that you've learned?
Are you asking me,
yeah.
Suzanne?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think Ashley said like most of it actually, as as well. There've slim pickings now of what we can choose, but I do think the can-do attitude. I have young adults as children, and my daughter in particular. It is the can-do attitude, and to be yourself. So I advocate a lot of, and I do it with clients as well, to be honest. There's coaching elements in having a client when they're dealing with their cases, is to really take care of yourself, to nurture yourself. And this is one of the things that we've all touched on today, is taking care. It's, you know, having a good diet, exercising, giving yourself the space, slowing down, doing all of that. That's, to me, number one. All of the 5 things I've listed, like the number one of really taking care of yourself. And I think once you do that, and you start to value, you start to automatically value yourself. And then the rest of it kind of falls into place. You have that can-do attitude, dream big. That's a thing that I'm always saying to people, because the only thing that's getting in your way is you. Very rarely is it somebody else. It might be perceived that way, but unless you're kicking and screaming and saying something and someone's still putting up walls, then you often are the person that's stopping yourself from going forward. And I think, you know, the sort of feel the fear and do it anyway, knees knocking, hands shaking, sweaty palms.
I love that. Feel the fear.
Yeah, go and do what you want to do. And actually the connections, see what you, if you see somebody with what you like and what you want, go and talk to them, find out how they got there, you know. And so for me, yes, those are the sorts of things that I would say. The world is actually your oyster until you put up the walls. So go out there, have that attitude, have a go. And the worst thing that can happen is someone says no and you realize that you're better off somewhere else.
That's very true. Very true.
And I mean, it's been fantastic hearing everybody's takes on it, because amongst everything else, I completely believe in it. But there's also a little bit that sometimes I like to latch onto, which I call think like a man. And I know it might come across controversial, but to a certain degree, it mitigates diving into those, you know, breaking the barriers, I call it, of those imposter syndromes and those, I can't possibly go for that, in terms of, I don't have enough skill set in order to apply for this. I know a man would never think about that. It's true, Richard, right? If you're going to be absolutely honest. So there's a part of me which feels like, actually, why don't you employ a little bit of that and think like a man? And I also am a massive advocate. Get a mentor as soon as you can. I came to it quite late. It could have been a lot more better for me if I had the wherewithal to think about what I could gain from having those connections and having that sounding board. And I feel where I can now, which is encourage young people to actually ask me questions as much as they like, because I feel that I still now have a lot of information that I can give back to them in terms of saying, have that opportunity to ask those pesky questions, but also can always remain curious. And I think curiosity is one of those key things that I think keeps things alive in terms of where you're going to go, in terms of speaking to those people that you think you don't have access to or shouldn't have access to. I think in the round it will help you move forward. So yeah, think like a man, get yourself a mentor and keep curious, keep being curious.
Right. And Jess, some final words to wrap up.
Yeah, Yvette, I love that. We have like a maybe even more controversial statement I'll say for offline, but I do think there's something to that. And actually what I wrote down, you know, as everyone was talking, that I think has been an important lesson is 2 things. One is just ask for it, right? We spend a lot of time mired down in the doubt and the worry. And I've had moments where, you know, even my husband would say, you know, why are you like spinning your wheels about this? Like men aren't worried about this. So kind of to your point, Yvette, it is very much like just embracing sort of that go for it attitude. And so for me, that has always come out as just ask for it, ask for what you want. In some cases you have to demand for it, but don't be afraid to make the ask, because I think the ask is really critical. And I think the second, and I think I would be doing myself a disservice here if I didn't say this just from my own experience, which is, you know, a lot of us plot out a course for our career. We rise through the ranks, and then we kind of get to what we think of as sort of the pinnacle of that. And we're looking around and we're like, is this really all there is? And I think it's okay for us to recognize that the path that you set for yourself at one point doesn't have to be the path you stay on forever, that you have the autonomy and the freedom to really create a life that allows you to do the work that you feel that you are best called to. So if that is, you know, taking a different career, if that is going into a different job, if that's, you know, making the leap into entrepreneurship, whatever that might be, it's okay to make that change. I just think too many times we stay stuck because, you know, well, this was the plan and the plan is the plan, right? But in reality, we have a lot of autonomy. And I think as you grow in your career, it's very easy to get stuck in sort of the comfort and the security of it. But that doesn't always necessarily mean it allows you to do your best work and the work that you're most called to in the world. So feeling like you have the freedom to make changes, I think, is a really important thing that should just sort of be planted in the back of your mind from the get-go. Like, I'm going to go this path, but that doesn't mean I have to stay on this path. I can, you know, veer off, sort of like Ashley, you know, jumping from different careers, different sectors, et cetera. I think, Richard, you said you did something similar. It's okay to make the pivot.
Can I just do a little shout out to my lovely friend Suzanne, who's remaining quiet, but she has done that thing which is pivoted as well. So she looks quite serious, but actually she's a burgeoning actress, and she did her first audition for the Vagina Monologues, and she's got a part, and she's going to be in Wimbledon Theatre in April. So please do get your tickets. I'll send the link for her. You thought you were going to get away with that, didn't you, Suzanne?
I'm so glad you did that, Yvette.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that.
So
do you know what? I think that's a natural evolution. I've always thought of barristers as lawyers who belong on the stage.
That's so interesting because for a long time I used to say to people, and I probably still do, I probably stopped now, but I'm not creative. I'm just really not very creative person, you know. And then a friend of mine said to me, don't you think being a lawyer is creative?
Yeah, right.
It's like, I've never really thought of it.
You hold a room. I mean, that's the power of a barrister. You're holding a room to carry an argument. I mean, look, well done you. Well done you.
I think it's As You Like It that says all the world's a stage and all the men and women players. And so we all have the capacity, I'm sure, to perform, and we perform all the time. We perform in work. We make all of these shifts. But yes, I think I love that what you're saying, Jess, about, you know, things can change. You can do something. You can expand. And that's what I've done. So yeah, if you want to see the Vagina Monologues, 23rd to the 20th in Wimbledon.
Wow.
So
not you, Richard.
I am. I'm looking.
He's checking his calendar.
Oh my God. Do you know? I'm going to share my favourite Shakespeare quote, because I actually think, based on, you know, what I've heard today, I think it applies. And I used to, when I was a young army officer, and, you know, I part of what I think has allowed me to get open is I was a successful sportsman, and then I was an army officer, and both of those things are all about resilience. But it's Shakespeare, which is, you know, our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. And to me, that's what it is. It's about, creating the culture where people feel they can try, and making it possible for them to try and also to fail without, with the psychological safety of being able to fail and learn and try again. But wonderful. And I think, as your advice to me earlier, actually, to create that accessible workplace, men need as much help in understanding what they need to do as anybody else. And as you say, conversations about, well, how about is actually just a brilliant way to start unlocking stuff.
Completely.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you to all our brilliant panelists for their contribution today. That's it for today's episode. It's been a great episode, and we look forward to seeing you again on the Procurement and Finance Coffee Break. Richard, your closing remarks.
I don't have any closing remarks. Do you know
Okay.
what? Just what honestly, just what fun, and just how good to have a great conversation about how we make the places we work better for everybody. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters. So from my side, thank you. It was a privilege to listen.
Yes. And if I may just say, I'm very proud of what women are achieving in the year 2025. And I think that we need to not just focus on, you know, the conversations around lack of confidence, but remember to end it on a note of, wow, look how well we're doing. Look,
and for International Women's Day, it's all about accelerating action. So let's keep that in mind. How do we accelerate it?
Yes.
So,
Well, on that note, from myself and Claire, thank you all for sharing, participating, advising, and I'm now going to take the heavy weight of responsibility for editing and showing it in its best possible light. Not that I'm going to cut anything out at all. I literally stick a beginning and end on it. That's my job. Wonderful. Claire.
Lovely.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.